Welcome to Algebra 1, Unit 7, Lesson 7, Practice Problems. We're going to start out with 4 vocabulary terms. Make sure we understand what we're talking about when we read the problems. The first term is coefficient. In an algebraic expression, the coefficient of a variable is the constant the variable is multiplied by. If the variable appears by itself, then it is regarded as being multiplied by 1, and the coefficient is 1. The coefficient of x in the expression 3x plus 2 is 3. The coefficient of p in the expression 5 plus p is 1. The second term is constant term. In an expression like 5x plus 2, the number 2 is called the constant term because it doesn't change when x changes. In the expression 5x minus 8, the constant term is negative 8, because we think of the expression as 5x plus negative 8. In the expression 12x minus 4, the constant term is negative 4. The third vocabulary term we have today is linear term. The linear term in a quadratic expression in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are constants, is the term bx. If the expression is not in standard form, it may need to be rewritten in standard form first. And our last vocabulary term is zero product property. The zero product property says that if the product of two numbers is 0, then one of the numbers must be 0. If you have any questions about any of these vocabulary terms, please use class time now to ask for clarification so that you understand what we're looking at as we go through the practice problems. So in the first practice problem, they want us to find two numbers that multiply to a number and add to another number. If you get stuck, try listing all the factors for the first number. So one thing I want to point out is that every time we are multiplying, we are getting a negative number. To multiply and get a negative, you must have a negative and a positive. In addition to that, you'll see that some of the numbers they want it to add to are negative, and some of the numbers they want it to add to are positive. Whatever sign you're adding to is the sign for the larger factor. So now, as we go through these, that's what we want to keep in mind. So on number 1, we need to multiply to negative 40. And we need to add to negative 6. So we're going to start going through the factors until we find a combination that would be 6 apart from each other. So we have 1 and 40. They're 39 apart. They're not going to come out to negative 6. We have 2 and 20. They're 18 apart. They're not going to come out to negative 6. And we have 4 and 10. They're 6 apart. So now we just need them in the right combination. One of them is positive and one of them is negative. Since we have a negative 6 that we wanted to add to, the negative is going to go with the big number. So for number 1, our answers are going to be negative 10, and positive 4. If you multiply these two together, negative 10 times 4 is negative 40. And if you add them together, negative 10 plus 4 equals negative 6. So this satisfies number 1. Number 2. Again, we're looking to multiply to negative 40, but this time we want it to add to positive 6. Since we want to add to a positive, we are going to put the positive with the larger factor. So this time, instead of negative 10 and positive 4, we're going to have positive 10 and negative 4. Again, 10 times negative 4 will equal negative 40, but 10 plus negative 4 will be 10 minus 4, which is positive 6. So you notice we had the same factors, but we want to make sure that whatever sign we're adding to is the sign we are giving to the larger factor. Next, number 3. We need to multiply to get 36, but we need them to add to 9. So we have 1 and 36. They're 35 apart. They're not going to add to 9. We have 2 and 18. They're 16 apart. They're not going to add to 9. We have 3 and 12, and those are 9 apart. So now we just need to know between 3 and 12 which one gets what symbol. Well, we want a positive 9, so we're going to make the larger factor, which is 12, positive, and we're going to make the smaller factor, which is 3, negative. So now 12 times negative 3 does equal 36, and 12 minus 3 does equal 9. So this satisfies number 3. And finally, number 4, we want to multiply to negative 36 again, but this time we want them to add to negative 5. So we were 12 apart at 3 and 12. The next pair of factors would be 4 and 9, and those are 5 apart. Since the 5 is negative, we want the larger factor to be negative, so we're going to have negative 9 and positive 4. Negative 9 times 4 does equal negative 36, and negative 9 plus 4 does equal negative 5. If you have any questions about how I solved these practice problems, please use class time now to ask for further clarification before we move on to the next problem. On our next question, they want us to create a diagram to show that x minus 5 times x plus 8 is equivalent to x squared plus 3x minus 40. When they say they want us to create a diagram, what they're talking about is having the boxes like this. We're going to put one of the factors across the top, x and negative 5. We're going to put the other factor down the side, x and positive 8. Now we're going to multiply the column and rows and write their answers where they meet. So we have x times x, which equals x squared. Then we have negative 5 times x, which is negative 5x. We have x times 8, which is positive 8x. And we have negative 5 times 8, which is negative 40. Once we fill out all the squares, we're going to add them all together. So we have x squared. Then we have negative 5x plus 8x, which is positive 3x. And finally, we have minus 40. And if you notice, this exactly matches the standard form that it's equivalent to. So this is how you can prove that the factored form given is equivalent to the standard form given. If you have any questions about how I solved this practice problem, please use class time now to ask for further clarification before we move on to the next practice problem. Next practice problem. Write a plus or a minus sign in each box so the expressions on each side of the equal sign are equivalent. So, as we look at this, one thing I know is that if I use the FOIL method, then I am going to be multiplying my constants together. So in all of these, I would multiply 18 times 3. Now, if I get a negative, these signs are going to need to be opposites. So, opposite signs on factors gives negative sign on C. But if they are positive, positive signs or same signs on factors gives plus sign on C. So as we look at this, on number 1, we're going to multiply 18 and 3, and we're going to get negative 54. So our signs must be opposites. One of them is a plus sign, one of them is a negative sign. Then we look at this symbol right here. We want the larger factor to get this symbol. So we're going to put minus 18 and plus 3. Now, if you think about it, we would have a negative 18x plus 3x, which would give us negative 15x, and we would have a negative 18 times a positive 3, which would give us negative 54. So now let's look at number 2. We see that we have this plus sign for 54. So we know the factors must have the same sign. The other symbol tells us what that symbol is. So the second plus tells us they're going to be the same. The first plus sign tells us they are both plus. Now we would end up with 18x plus 3x, which would give us 21x, and we would have 18 times 3, which would give us 54. Now if we look at number 3, the second sign is a negative. This tells us the signs for our factors must be opposites. Then we look at the first symbol, and it tells us which symbol goes with the larger factor. This time it's a plus, so we're going to put the plus with the 18 and the minus with the 3. Now if you think through your FOIL method, you would have 18x minus 3x, which would give you the 15x that we have. And you would have the 18 times the negative 3, which would give us the negative 54, which we have. And number 4, we're going to look at the second symbol first. It's a plus. That means our signs are the same. Then we look at the first symbol, the negative, and it tells us that both symbols are going to be minus signs. A negative 18x minus 3x would be negative 21x, and a negative 18 times a negative 3 would be a positive 54. So again, the second symbol tells you whether they are going to be the same or opposites. If it's a plus sign, they're going to be the same. If it's a negative sign, they're going to be opposites. If they're opposites, the first sign tells you which sign goes to the larger factor. If your first sign was positive, plus, look at your first sign, and that'll tell you which sign they both get. If you have any questions about this one, please use class time now to ask for further clarification before we move on to the next practice problem. Next practice problem. Match each quadratic expression in standard form with its equivalent expression in factored form. So if we look at A, we know that we need factors of 35 that are separated by 2. So we're going to have opposite factors. One will be plus, one will be minus, and the larger one will be the negative. So if we start looking at factors of 35, we have 1 and 35. They're separated by 34. We have 5 and 7, and those are separated by 2. So I'm going to want a negative 7 and a positive 5. So now, if I'm looking for my factors, I'm going to need negative 7 plus 7. So that could be number 1 or number 4. And then I'm going to need 5 minus 5. So A is going to have to match 4. Next practice problem. Match each quadratic expression in standard form with its equivalent expression in factored form. So if I try to think about the factors here, I'm going to have opposite factors of 35 with the larger being negative and the factors being separated by 2. So if we're thinking through the factors of 35, we have 1 and 35, but they're separated by 34. Then we have 5 and 7, and they're separated by 2. So that means we want 5 and 7, but we want the 7 to be the negative. So as we look through, we want a positive 5 and a negative 7. So A must match number 3. Now we look at B. We want the factors of 35 where they have the same sign, and that sign is going to be positive, and they are going to add together to give us 12. So I have 1 and 35, which would become 36, and then I have 5 and 7, which would add together to be 12. So I want plus 5 and plus 7, so B has to match number 1. Next, we're going to look at C. We have a negative 35, so we want factors that are opposite of each other. And when they add together, we're going to get positive 2, so we want the larger factor to get the plus sign. This time we're going to use 5 and 7, but we want the 7 to be the positive. So we want x minus 5 and x plus 7, so that is going to equal 4. And choice D, we want factors of 35 that have the same sign and join together to make negative 12. So this would be negative 5 and negative 7. So D must match choice 2. If you have any questions about how to match quadratic expressions in standard form with their equivalent expressions in factored form, please use class time to ask for clarification now before we move on to the next problem. And the last problem we have for lesson 7, rewrite each expression in factored form. If you get stuck, try drawing a diagram. Well, for number 1, I know that I want opposite signs, so I'm going to have an x plus, and I'm going to have an x minus. I know that I'm going to want my larger factor to get the minus, and I want factors of 28 that will add together to give me negative 3. So I have 1 and 28, that would be 27. I have 2 and 14, that would be 12 apart. I have 4 and 7, those are 3 apart. So if I make the negative 7 and the positive 4, now if I did FOIL, I would have x squared negative 7x plus 4x would give me negative 3x, and 4 times negative 7 would give me negative 28. So that is our factored form. Number 2. Again, I want factors of negative 28, so they have to be opposites. So I'm going to have an x plus, and I'm going to have an x minus. But this time, I want the larger factor to get the plus sign. So now we're going to put 7 with the plus and 4 with the minus. Now, if we went ahead and we did FOIL, we would end up with a positive 7x minus 4x, which would give us the plus 3x for the bx term. Number 3. Again, I want factors of negative 28, so I know they're going to be opposites. I'm going to have an x plus, and I'm going to have an x minus. But now I want those factors to be 12 apart. So I've got 1 and 28. Those are apart by 27. And I've got 2 and 14. Those are 12 apart. The plus 12 tells me I want the plus sign with the larger factor. So this would be x plus 14 times x minus 2. And finally, number 4, we want factors of negative 60. So that means our signs need to be opposite. We're going to have an x plus, and we're going to have an x minus. And I want factors of 60 that are 28 apart, and I want the larger factor getting the negative. So I have 1 and 60, those are 59 apart, and I have 2 and 30. Those are 28 apart, and I want the larger one with the negative, so it'll be x minus 30 and x plus 2. If you have any questions about any of the practice problems from Lesson 7, please use class time to ask for further clarification before we move on to Lesson 8.